Lots of people aren't saving at the right level, or they're saving at the kind of minimum levels. You don't want to kind of get to retirement and then suddenly go, oh, I thought I was on track. Ouch.
Joe Dabrowski is Deputy Head of Policy at Pensions UK, formerly the PLSA. They're the people that come up with the retirement living standards, but they also work behind the scenes to influence pension policy. Do you think we need to concede that a lot of people aren't going to get the moderate as they are right now?
It's unlikely that I think the state pension level will increase significantly to kind of uplift people.
That's a change that I think we could do that now.
I wouldn't disagree that we've waited too long.
I would know you as the PLSA, but I think you've just been through a rebrand, haven't you?
Yeah, we've just changed to be known as Pensions UK.
It's a big domain, that.
But I love a rebrand. They used to call me T-Money. My old Instagram was T-Finessing. My new Instagram is T is making money, so follow me. Also been called, what else have I been
Crypto
called?
Pappy.
Crypto Pappy. So yeah, rebranding's, I think it's very good. Makes it a bit more clear for people.
Yeah, I think it sort of does what it says on the tin a little bit more.
Yeah.
He's had more names than P. Diddy, this guy. More baby oil as well. More controversies. He's got secrets.
I'm not commenting on that.
Yeah. Welcome to the podcast. Yeah, why the name change?
We wanted to kind of make sure that it was kind of clear who we are. There's a lot going on in the pension sector at the moment. Just kind of establishing, ourselves as a kind of voice of pensions. We're a 102-year-old organisation, so
wow.
We've been through several name changes over different times, but this is all about kind of making it really clear about what we stand for, who we stand for, and a kind of mission, which is about helping people have a better income in retirement.
We'll get into that mission and you as an organisation, but I think most people would know you who watch my content through the living standards, which are a set of guidelines about how much people might need in retirement. Have you got those figures?
Yeah, I've got the figures. So the retirement living standards talk about kind of the expenditure that you might need in retirement. So we know that people find it kind of quite hard to think about the kind of future and kind of, how much is it going to cost me to live in retirement? When we kind of first thought of the kind of concept, we were considering actually, how do you get this into people? How do you kind of make it a bit more like your 5 a day? People kind of know those refrains. And so the kind of living standards are supposed to help people get that kind of picture of kind of what it looks like at different levels. So we've got comfortable, which is really tends to be kind of for higher earners, moderate, which is most people, and kind of minimum. And we're looking at levels for a couple. And I think we moved to talking a little bit more about a couple recently. Most people, 70% of people when they go into retirement, live as part of a 2-person household. I mean, that could be your wife, a spouse, something else, family. So when we think about that kind of level of people, we're looking at sort of at the minimum level, about 21,600 for 2 people. For moderate, 43,900, and comfortable, 60,600. And comfortable is the upper end. So most people are going to be minimum moderate. That's where most people's kind of ambition should be and where their expenditure will be.
And what about single? The single amount?
Single figures for the minimum are 13,400, for moderate 31,700, and the comfortable 43,900.
How much was moderate again? Sorry.
Moderate is 43,900 for a couple.
Between 2 people. It doesn't sound that moderate though.
But take into account some of that includes the state pensions. The state pension is 12k per person, so it'd be 24 covering that. And then the standard kind of, it's built by talking to real people, kind of a bit like we are here. We kind of get people in a room. We ask them to essentially, people from across the nation, different ages, in a room. Imagine kind of what's your retirement going to look like. Make them think about their house, their lifestyle. Look around yourself. What's your kitchen look like? Have you got a car? How often are you traveling? What are you doing with your family and friends? Where are you eating? Where are you shopping? And all of that adds up to the kind of basket. And then we look at the basket of goods for the different levels. And that kind of tells you what the sums are.
But does this assume that you own your property?
At the moment, it assumes you do own your property. Well, it doesn't include housing costs.
Yeah, which is very big for a lot of people.
It's big for a lot of people, but a lot of people today, and we update the standards regularly, but a lot of people today own their house when they go into retirement. So about 80% of people own their house going into retirement. So the costs for housing are a small proportion for the other part of the population. Some of that might be covered by housing benefit or other support. But it is a factor, and we kind of keep the standards kind of under review. We have housing calculators that sit alongside the standards. And I guess the other thing is housing costs vary enormously across the UK. So it's very difficult to kind of have a common measure for housing costs. So, in London versus, say, in Scarborough or wherever it will be, the costs can be incredibly different. And therefore, people need to just kind of factor that in a little bit more, for their circumstances. And I guess, the wider thing for the standard is they're not kind of, they give you kind of 3 levels to think about, but you tailor them for how they suit your needs, because you might want 3 holidays a year. You might want 1. I feel that might be the other way around.
Yeah. Wise man.
Who are they for? Who are they aimed at? Like, what is the purpose of them, would you say?
Yeah, they're aimed at everybody. We want everybody to kind of have that kind of clear view of actually what might my lifestyle look like in retirement. We want everybody to be able to think, actually, I know roughly what the kind of 3 levels are that I need to think about, where I am, what level works for me. We want people to use their provider. You can kind of log on to most of your providers. All the main providers use the retirement living standards, and we're hoping that they get built into other things like the pension dashboard or the MAPS help and advice service. But so you can just go on, you can think, actually, where am I? What am I on track? What is my lifestyle going to look like? Am I on track? Can I log into your provider site or in the future on a dashboard and think, am I kind of about right? Do I want to do more? What other choices can I make?
Do you worry about a sort of bias in the fact that the data you collect is from a cohort that are probably the richest retirees ever, the boomer generation, say, and then you're saying to people, oh, this is kind of where you want to aim, but they may never be able to get to that level. For example, you say 70% of people own their own home outright or whatever. We know that projections are that as much as 50% of people might arrive at retirement without owning a home, or by 2050, they think that retirees will be 10% worse off than the ones today. So it's almost like we're using the gold standard to create the model of what is normal.
Yeah, I mean, we have focus groups to understand what kind of real people are thinking about. We use the kind of Joseph Rowntree Foundation and Loughborough University evidence, which kind of got a very broad cross spectrum of people. But it's also about it's an explanation of the expenditure for a lifestyle. So I mean, that doesn't necessarily change. When you look at the levels within the lifestyle, kind of how it breaks down, what might I be spending on my shopping? Am I cutting my own hair, or am I going to the salon? Am I buying a car every 5 years or running it into the ground and then taking the train? All of those things are factored in, and they kind of reflect people's real choices. When I look at the levels, they don't look like the kind of unrealistic expectations for people, certainly at the kind of minimum and moderate. When you're thinking about what is it people want in their life, they might want 1 holiday a year as a minimum in retirement. They might want to, shop and live reasonably and have a couple of meals out every couple of months. I don't think that's unrealistic for people. I think the real question is, obviously, how do we make sure that people have enough savings in retirement to afford those sorts of things? I think that's a different question about the kind of levels of adequacy we've got in this country at the moment, certainly for many. And our work and lots of evidence shows, and hopefully the Pensions Commission that was launched just this week will kind of examine a bit more again, is how do you get people saving at levels which are going to get them close to this level of retirement if that's what they want, and those kind of replacement rates?
Yeah, I think 50% of people are not paying into a private pension was the figure that I saw bandied about. And I highly suspect that the government's kind of reforms will be, let's whack the age up a little bit on state pension, because, we can't touch the triple lock.
I think the figure for 50% might have been for the self-employed.
Okay.
So,
see, I thought that was 1 in 5. It seems to have shot up a lot.
Yeah, the level of self-employed has changed quite a lot in the last decade. So, we've seen the kind of enormous explosion of kind of gig working and insecure work. Some of that will alter as part of the kind of employment bill that's going through presently. But for most people who are in a workplace, nearly all of them are in a AE, automatic enrolment scheme. We've seen millions of people come into that system. Problem is, still lots of people aren't saving at the right level, or they're saving at the kind of minimum levels. We know there's been a cost of living crisis. We know there's been the great financial crisis too. There's lots of headwinds for people to worry about. But we do need to make sure that people are thinking, actually, if I'm going to have any form of reasonable level of lifestyle in retirement, what does that look like for me, and how do I save to get there?
Yeah, I think, the 50% figure, if 10% of people opt out of the workplace scheme, which they do, you also have people that don't work, 10% are economically inactive. You're already at 20% of people there. You have people that are part-time workers. You get a lot of the population are not paying into those schemes, even though I can see that auto-enrollment has been a massive success. And I get what you're saying. The standards aren't saying that, they're just like a spending pattern and saying this is what we would call moderate. Do you think we need to concede that a lot of people aren't going to get the moderate as they are right now?
I think quite a lot of people aren't on track for moderate presently. Certainly, my generation, Gen X, for example, and Gen Z and others might be more stretched too. There is a question of how do you address that. Some of that is making sure that people are aware. You don't want to kind of get to retirement and then suddenly go, oh, I thought I was on track. Ouch, I'm not. And we know that roughly 70% of people don't have a kind of plan presently for what they're going to get at retirement or their retirement planning more generally. There's a lot of questions about how people kind of interact their thinking with that and say, am I going to get some inheritance from my family house or something else? There's lots of things that people kind of weigh up. But we do need to kind of get back to thinking, okay, what is a reasonable level of retirement spending for me? How does that fit against my current lifestyle? And what can I do about it to make sure I get there either now or, if I'm in mid-career or, at the beginning of your career? And that might be that you don't have the level of contributions, from your employer, from yourself at the beginning, but you've got a plan to kind of get up there potentially as you kind of progress through your career. And, lots of other things to factor in, when do you start a family? How do you buy a house? All of these things, it's real complicated.
Yeah, I saw the IFS said that when they consider housing costs, which is obviously a big consideration, a big cost for working families, I think 80% fall short of the moderate standard in their whilst working. So is it too much to expect that they then suddenly fall into the moderate once they stop? I think it was 35% of working households don't reach the minimum standard as well.
So I think most people should reach the minimum standard if they're getting a full state pension over their career.
Is it just short? Is it 12,000? Is the minimum standard 13k for a single person?
Minimum standard is for a single person 13,400, and it's 12k now for state pension. So if you're putting in minimum levels of contribution over your career, the kind of 3 and 5% split that we've got in AE at the moment for DC schemes, then you will get the difference for sure. The question is, if you're then looking to get to that moderate space, you might be making some choices between mixtures of moderate and minimum lifestyle, but they're not supposed to be kind of flat rate targets. They reflect people's needs, and people will adjust them.
I think I said at the start, obviously, about the richest retirees ever. I think it's worth saying, I think 13% of retirees at the minute only rely on state pension, so fall below the minimum standard by a few hundred quid, but
and we've
got right below it.
There's a lot of retirees today as well that aren't on the new state pension, on the old state pension, which provides a lot less than the new state pension.
Yeah. So would you encourage people to use the standards as almost kind of like a pick and mix, where they go into it and go, oh, I would like a retirement like this and this and this, and build their own standard as such, rather than rigidly go, I want to be moderate? Or
I think definitely don't think of it as a sort of a ballpark. Am I going to be roughly here or there? Some of that will reflect your kind of current income and your income expectations over the kind of course of your career. But then a lot of the if you're logging in with your provider or onto a tool that's available somewhere, a lot of that will allow you to flex. So I'm going to spend more money on my shopping, or I'm going to spend more money on my holidays, or my car, or my travel, or whatever else. So adjust it to suit your needs. It's not a kind of one size fits all for sure.
So your organisation, you said you're very old. I didn't realise you were that old. Are you funded by the pension providers themselves? Is that how you? Yeah,
so we're a not-for-profit organisation, and our members are primarily pension funds who contribute to us by kind of membership fee. We run events and other things, but that's who we are. We kind of, for retirees, for savers, that's our kind of primary focus. And we are not for profit. We kind of pay for ourselves through subscriptions.
The point that you made around increasing contributions across the UK, I think if we look at superannuation, the Australian scheme, they're at about 12%, aren't they? But they have a means-tested state pension, so you need a higher contribution on the private side. Do you have a view on, or do your members or the people who fund the organisation have a view on what a sensible contribution rate is for a UK model where we have a state pension?
Yeah, so by and large, we think about 12% is going to be right for most people as a contribution, with a mix of a split between the employer and the employee. Now, the Pension Commission, which was launched this week, will have a look at kind of what does adequacy look like for most people, what are the savings rates, and how to kind of increase it. We think probably the AE system we got at the moment will need to develop to be more flexible. Certainly, it will probably need to be more flexible if increases in rates arise for persistent low earners. So if I'm consistently on a low income, then 12% might mean that I oversave, and therefore I'm going to have to make choices which I'm probably not aware of between how I buy my kids' shoes or what food I can put on the table. So we think that will need flex. But we're doing some work to kind of look at, if you raise from the levels we've got now, what does that look like for different people? If you kind of raise it straight to 12%, or you flex it, or you give people more choices, how do people's expectations change? I think, most people these days will bank to some degree on an app, and then you can flick a switch and go, I want to put more money here or there daily. So we think the system over time will have to adjust to reflect kind of people's wants and needs. It can't just be static. And so that needs a lot of thinking through, and we don't know yet without completing the work to understand what outcomes that will drive for people as well.
Okay, T, talk to me about your attitudes towards risk.
I mean, I like a bit of risk in my investments, but I definitely would say since the podcast, I've toned it down a little bit, not quite as gung-ho and carefree as I was in risk. So yeah,
shooting from the hip all the time, weren't you? Yeah. I think personally that you should take risks, but it should always be in areas where you have a unique skill set, an edge, expertise, like your job, things like this.
Definitely.
One area that I wouldn't take any risks is compliance.
Yeah, the risk changes as you grow in business, and you need to be on top of it, which is why we partner with Vanta.
Vanta automates a lot of risk processes and helps you see your risks in a centralized platform, so you know what really needs your attention.
Besides risk, the main thing Vanta does is automate compliance with security protocols you need to scale, like GDPR, HIPAA, ISO 27001, and SOC 2.
The beauty of Vanta is they make it easy to prove you're compliant with these standards, saving you up to 90% of the time it takes. And on average, $500,000.
If you know what these acronyms like SOC 2 are, you probably need Vanta. You can book in a demo at vanta.com/making money. There's a link in the description.
I want to come back to the points around increasing the amount that people pay in, because I think it's fair for me to say, if you're representing the pension industry and the providers, is there any conversations internally about what they can do to improve the amount that people have in their pensions? Reduction of fees, stopping aggressive lifestyling within portfolios and slapping people in bond funds when they're young. These stuff that doesn't require extra deposits but still produces bigger returns. Yeah,
there's quite a lot that can be done. So I guess probably worth saying that most people saving today are saving in an automatic enrolment provider. Those have got charge caps on them, and the charge cap is quite low, and the actual fees, because of the competition in the market, the fees that are charged on the caps are in fact more or less half the cap, which is already kind of low. So the fees are really low. The question is, how do you make sure you're going to get the maximum bang for your buck? So there's quite a lot of work going on at the moment to think about combinations of things. So how do you potentially invest in more growth assets? And that might be investing in more private markets type assets to get kind of higher growth. 16 or 17 of the largest providers have signed up to try and do that and invest more in the UK too by 2030. The other big question is, at the moment, we've got a system which kind of gets you to retirement in DC and then kind of hands you over or hands you back. It says, well, up to you, work out what you're doing. And the pension schemes bill, which is going through at the moment, is going to introduce something called guided retirement products, which means that actually you'll be more or less defaulted into a product in retirement, which means that you won't kind of get this lifestyling switch off in the same way that has existed previously. And also that maybe you'll be invested for longer in different ways, which might get you more return. So a lot of it's about kind of keeping return-seeking assets going for longer, keeping those fees down, but also helping people to make kind of choices at the same time.
So do you think there's an agreement within I don't know, how would you call them? What would you call the pension company to you? What's the relationship? Clients or
what are fund members?
Yeah, the fund members.
Yeah.
So the pension providers.
Yeah, the pension schemes. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think there's an admission that lifestyling might not be the way, or de-risking people as they approach retirement age is probably not the best way to produce long-term returns?
Well, de-risking worked well in the past when you had a system where people kind of passed over to
buying an
annuity,
yeah.
And when annuity rates were good, we had a combination of introduction of freedom of choice and then reductions in the values you were getting from annuities because of the kind of market conditions. I think there's a recognition that actually keeping people on risk for longer and recognizing that most people have healthy lives for longer, and therefore you can carry more investment risk into your 60s or potentially into your early 70s, and that kind of combination of product that allows you to do that kind of at the back end of your or start of your retirement rather than your kind of saving part of your time will potentially get better outcomes. Some of that's also looking at completely new ways of doing things like collective defined contribution schemes, which they've tried in Europe and in particular in the Netherlands, which is all about a similar thing, and also collective investment rather than individual investment.
And what about lifestyling at the start? I looked at Nest and then they won't call it de-risking. We had the CEO of the investment here. He said it's not de-risking, but by my view, putting people in bond funds early on is a form of de-risking. And the justification was we don't want to scare people out of the products. Is that something that could be looked at? Because, if I was talking to my son and he was approaching his 20s, I would be saying you should probably be in equities if you've got a long timeline of investment horizon and you want to potentially maximize returns. Just understand that it's likely going to be a bit more volatile.
Yeah, I think it's fair. I think most funds, by and large, when you're in that kind of early accumulation phase, that kind of early saving phase, and across the kind of middle part of the savings journey, the largest DC providers today are kind of 70, 80% in kind of risk growth assets. There might be some proportion which is in kind of less risky assets or less growth assets, partly kind of a diversification of that risk. But I think for most people, they're going to be there. Most every large provider goes regularly through a kind of period of revisiting what's their default strategy. Is it appropriate for the membership? Will it change over the next 5 years? What do I need to update? Some of that, is going to be in this kind of growth agenda that's been agreed by the kind of very largest providers. And I think probably some of that will evolve too, because what we're seeing is a lot of those, when automatic enrollment started, a lot of those funds and schemes were relatively new. They've grown reasonably quickly, and some of them incredibly quickly over 10 years. And now they've reached kind of a scale which is going to be 25 billion or beyond each, ultimately by the end of this decade. And so the choices that they can make in their investment portfolios are also going to be different. And that means they can offer different things to savers.
Yeah, start building wind farms and infrastructure investment, especially if the mega fund stuff happens, right?
Exactly.
On that topic, the mega funds, and is it the Accord, the Pact, or the Reforms? I don't know what they call it anymore. Mansion House.
So the Mansion House Accord is the voluntary commitment between the industry and the kind of government about looking to, by 2030, get 10% of portfolios into private markets and 5% in the UK. And that's kind of building stuff like wind farms, solar, schools, social housing, all that kind of stuff.
How do your members feel about that as a mandation of assets. And, for me, if someone says to me, I have to spend 5% of my money on Mars bars, what if I don't want a Mars bar? Or what if there's no Mars bars to buy? What do I do?
Yeah, so the accord is voluntary, so everybody's kind of comfortable with that.
There's a back door though, isn't there?
The reserve power that's being introduced in the pension schemes bill is not welcomed by the industry. We don't think that a mandation is necessary. We think it kind of oversteps the mark in terms of that kind of fiduciary duty that trustees have to invest in the best interests of savers. I think government don't want to go there, but I think they're kind of also kind of recognising and a little bit cautious that in the past, when there's been discussion about change and investment into the UK, it hasn't materialised as quickly as they would like. And there's all sorts of reasons for that. But we would rather not have this mandation power, and we think actually working on a voluntary basis, which ensures savers' interests are kind of at the forefront of any decisions, are going to be important. And we want to see some changes in the pension schemes bill. And so we're kind of engaging with that live at the moment to try and sort that out.
Because if there was loads of good investments to buy in the UK, your members would be buying them, right? Because they want the best investments internationally or whatever.
There's nobody who's sitting around thinking, oh, there's a great investment, I want to pass it up. And some of that is about getting that kind of pipeline of investable opportunities through. We've had 5 or 10 years where there's been a lot of change in government, and that means that priorities and investment decisions, look at HS2, for example, have changed quite a lot at different times. That means that investors are less sure about what, am I going to invest in this thing, or is the rug going to be pulled out from under it at some point? We've seen in the last couple of months from this government, various sets of plans for how they want to support investment into various combinations of regions or types of investment, whether it's the green transition or whether it's other things. If those things kind of come to fruition, so that's where you need that kind of combination of government working on that pipeline of stuff to invest in, and then also pension funds moving into that space to kind of invest where they can to get outcomes that will be returns, but also, improve the society that we live in.
One thing that's interesting, I was kind of wondering, why would pension providers pay for you to exist? And you're clearly quite clued up and have an opinion on the Accord. Is that the influence is that another part of the picture that you do for these providers? Are you speaking to government? Lobbying might be the term, or?
Yeah, so we do a lot of different things for members. Some of it is getting them together to talk about problems, shared issues. Most of our members come very much with a kind of philosophy of how do we make sure that people have, good outcomes, and how do we make sure the kind of system works. So obviously government is continuously kind of looking to change things. And so some of the things that we do are kind of engage with government and go, actually, you've got a plan to do this. That's really not going to work in this way because it's going to cost, millions of pounds to implement. There's a shorter way of doing it. Or what about this? Or instead of that, there's a big reporting burden that you're introducing. So some of it's about kind of making sure that that works. But a lot of it, and a lot of the focus that we have on our kind of policy work, which is engagement with governments, is how do you make outcomes for people better? Is it, you think about, does the system have the right kind of governance in place? Are standards high enough on the people that are managing your scheme? And our members want to have a well-run system to make sure that people have good outcomes. But it's also positive for them because they want standards to be high, so people who come and participate in the market are of the right quality, the right kinds of people. These are, we're talking about trillions of pounds worth of money in the system, so it needs to be effectively governed and looked after. We need to make sure the kind of systems work. We also need to make sure that people's outcomes at the end of it are right. And quite a lot of the time, that's also about making sure that legislation is not overly complicated for individuals or for the pension schemes to kind of put together and implement.
You're non-profit. Are the pension schemes for-profit?
So there's a mixture of provision in the market. So you've got, most of our members are non-profit. They're trust-based schemes. So they essentially sit as a separate trust alongside the employer. Their only job is essentially to look after the interests of savers, make sure they get paid on time, make sure that their investments are put away in the right places, that they grow effectively. Some parts of the market are profit-based, and some of that is combinations of different services that they might offer. But some of it is also about, small margins.
Okay. Yeah, because, assets under management is where fees are collected. So I know that obviously the agreement is 12%, but we do have that state pension provision, whereas in Australia they don't, but they're at 12%. So I wonder why do we want 12% when we have state pension as well? Why would we be higher than the Australian system in that sense? And, someone in your comments will be cynical and say, your members are incentivized to get assets under management to collect more in fees. And is that why we're pushing for the 12%?
So the 12% is all about how do you get those outcomes for individuals. We know that there are controls over the levels of fees that might be charged on investment services. Also, the bulk of the market where most savers are now in kind of AE, they've got a combination of that cap, but also they're run by trust-based schemes who are actually very fierce on the fees that the asset managers that they might use charge them. And I know a lot of them, including Nesta, you mentioned before, will say, actually, we're not paying traditional private equity
2
fees.
and 20.
Yeah, we're not paying that.
Yeah,
we're just not accepting that on behalf of our members. So also, as these schemes get to scale, the ability for them to kind of exercise more pressure on the asset managers that they might utilize kind of grows too. So the reason we need 12% for the average person, the average income earner, is about kind of that outcome, because the outcome that you get at the far end is not going to get you to that kind of minimum or moderate standard unless it's at more or less that level. Sorry, minimum will be fine, but moderate. If you're looking for an average earner to get that moderate level, you need to be roughly saving about 12% across your lifetime. And it's unlikely, I think, we'll see, there's a state pension review as part of the Pensions Commission, but it's unlikely that I think the state pension level will increase significantly to kind of uplift people. And we've got an aging population, fewer working, and therefore the kind of ability for that kind of smaller cohort of workers versus the kind of older demographic to kind of carry that is going to be really challenging. So it's going to be up to individuals and their employers to contribute more.
Yeah, the OBR pointed to how expensive the scheme had been versus their expectations. And in a short time, it's like 15 billion a year already, right? And
I mean, some of that's obviously the really high inflation that we've had post the pandemic, those kind of 10 and 15% inflation years, which, have that compounding effect, which are pretty unusual. But
the 2.5 doesn't help either, because in the years where it shouldn't be going up, it does, right? Yeah. You say, it's unlikely that it will rise. Do you mean around the triple lock? Is that what you're saying? Because that guarantees it rise, right?
Yeah, so the triple lock, I think we'll continue. I think that maybe the base level and where that sits in the system, I think, the state pension is the backbone of most people's pension provision at the moment. And we've still got, essentially, because we've kind of had this historic difference in provision in the UK. So you've got, a lot of people now coming to retirement are going to be retiring with a mixture of state pension and a mixture of final salary DB pension. And DB pension traditionally pays out more than current savings within DC. And so that group of people coming into retirement are going to be in one position. But the people who are kind of coming behind in kind of combinations of Gen X and Gen Z need to be saving more typically if they're in DC only than they are presently under kind of minimum standards in order to get to a decent level of retirement.
But the pressure on them to fund the state pensions of the people ahead of them is greater because they're a smaller population base.
Yeah, and this is the big societal kind of trade-off that we need to work through as part of the commission and a part of the state pension review, because it is going to be, we know at the moment that kind of younger cohorts are facing kind of higher household costs. Some of the things that you might have traditionally done in your life are starting later. People are buying their first house later. They're having a family later. Whether they're having 1 or 2 children is all changing. Student loans, etc. There's a lot of pressure on these groups. And I think the question is, how do we find the right balance to make sure that people are actually getting a good outcome at the end of it? Because there aren't any other kind of really good choices, because ultimately an individual will have to contribute, the employer will have to contribute, or the state will have to contribute, and the state will be back on taxpayers. And we know that if the kind of people get to retirement and don't have enough income, they're going to have to fall back on the state, and that means higher welfare bills. So the incentive there for government to kind of actually act as part of this commission is quite high.
Last time we recorded, Tremaine, you were having some real dramas with your accountant. So how's that been going, mate?
They're sacked. So drama sorted. They're a big corporate firm. They didn't really reply to my emails very quickly, like took a week or two at times. And they charged me way too much. I mean, I've got pretty simple taxes and yeah, they were charging me thousands. They saved me some money, but yeah, I had to move on.
Slow and expensive.
Pretty much, yeah.
This is one of the reasons that we're really happy to be partnering with Taxzap.
It's a tech platform that makes self-assessment simple. Whether you're self-employed like me, a freelancer, or a director like Damo, big dog.
Instead of sending endless emails, bills and spreadsheets to your accountant, you just connect your bank, answer a few questions that are only relevant to you, and your tax return can be ready in as little as 15 minutes.
Taxzap is really easy to use and it's HMRC recognized software. So it's safe, secure, and legit.
The price is also decent. So if you're self-employed with one income stream, it's just £89 as a one-off fee. No big accountancy fees. And we also have a discount code, of course.
If you need to file a self-assessment this year, give Taxzap a try. We've left a link in the description and use the code MONEY10 for 10% off your first tax filing.
You think that they have that incentive and the will and they're not just focused on the next election, say?
Well, I think they've said as part of the launch of the commission this time around that they're looking for the commission to report for retirees up until kind of 2050s. They've also said AE contributions aren't rising during the course of this parliament. So that kind of is a little bit of a breathing space in terms of this electoral cycle. But we'd like to see kind of certainly from our position by the mid-30s, those levels of pension savings increasing towards 12% are kind of across the board, you know, potentially with some additional flexibilities that we don't have now. But by then you need to be starting to make those changes. Otherwise, you know, you're going to just piling up problems for later. Yeah, and I think one of the hardest things for people of our age is uncertainty around the long-term viability of pension structures. State pension is like this social contract, but then everyone seems to think, well, I'm not going to get that by my age. And I think long-term reassurance around it would be great. If they just came out and said 30% of the average salary is where we want state pension to be long-term, and we're going to make sure that it hits at that kind of level, and then you've got to go get the other 30-odd% for your private. Yeah. At least everyone knows where they stand then. But right now we feel like we have this triple lock that just ratchets it up at the detriment to the younger generations who feel like, I'm never going to get that. Yeah, so I think that will come under questioning as part of this state pension age review. End any government that does it, right? So like, who's going to jump on that sword? Well, I think there's a question about, you know, once the government has got the kind of, the commission has looked at the, essentially the kind of savings gap that exists in the system and kind of evidence that, and you can pair that against looking at the costs of the state pension, including potentially, you know, where the triple lock is, they will be able to take an informed choice. At the moment, they probably don't have the information, probably have some of the information, but they don't have the complete information to... Everyone knows the triple lock is expensive. It is expensive, but also we know that without the triple lock, levels of income for pensioners had declined for many decades. You know, there's really difficult issues on there because you've got pensioners who may have had poor state pensions, but also, you know, a poor portion, but not the entire proportion, have ended up with vast housing wealth because housing prices have increased. So there's so many complicated moving factors. I think it's really difficult to... So I think that the kind of evidence base that kind of lifts the stone on all of that and gets reported on the commission will be really helpful. We know the last commission was kind of essentially set the framework that we've had for the last 20 years, for now roughly 20 years, and kind of didn't shy away from the hard questions. I'm hoping this one will do something similar and we'll end up with kind of similar outcomes at the other side of it. I don't see those changes happening in the course of this parliament or this electoral cycle. They'll be like for the next government to think about. I was going to ask, are you optimistic on the future of pensions? And if so or not, how long do you think it will take for us to see some changes? I mean, there's a lot in this pension schemes bill which is going to really, really change the system that we've got for in the next 5 years. We're going to see, you know, soon we're going to have people being able to see all their pensions on the pensions dashboard from next year or beyond. That's a game changer. We're going to see a lot of consolidation potentially in the market. We're going to see people having new options that provide them through retirement solutions rather than the ones that they might have now, kind of on a kind of more mixed basis. and we're going to see fewer, bigger providers probably by the end of this decade and into the early 30s. And then I think we'll see the commission work come through in that kind of 5 years after the 2030s, probably.
So can we just understand what that commission stuff means then? So the last one, as a good example, what was the process and what happened as a result of that one 20 years ago that you said?
Yeah, so the last pension commission was launched by the Labour government. It ran for, I think in total, about 5 years. It looked at the challenges of pensioner poverty, also some of the kind of risks that existed in the system in terms of where the protections there for people if their employer went bust. Looked at the challenges around kind of the changing demographics that we had then and the state pension and a whole range of other issues. So from that came the automatic enrolment system that we've got now that has brought tens of millions of people into pension savings, where that had been in decline kind of in the 90s and early noughties. It established the framework and the kind of thinking for the Pension Protection Fund, which looks after people in final salary pensions if their employer goes bust. So then if that happens to you, like, you know, a lot of household names like Woolworths, British Home Stores and others, that means that you know, in the past, you might not have received much of your pension. Now you receive, if you're a pensioner, 100% of your pension or 90% if you're not at retirement. So, you know, big protections, big changes to the system. And I think, you know, we could see something similar, hopefully, from this commission if it has the sort of right level of ambition.
Do you think we can afford to wait 5 years? It's like another commission to figure out the problems. The problems are right now, right? And we don't get the time back.
Yeah, we have to. I mean, none of this stuff is easy. There's a big change program already in place. I don't think the system could cope with a lot more change kind of immediately. I think we also probably have to recognise that the challenges that face savers around the kind of cost of living, employers around some of the increases in costs and employers, and also the low growth that we've had for the period and the extra costs that have come through from the pandemic and higher inflation. And all of these things are really difficult to kind of work through. I don't think there's doesn't feel like there's a huge amount of extra capacity to increase savings immediately on people, and also employers, savers and others need essentially what we always talk about as kind of a roadmap for change. It doesn't, don't have to do it now, but actually you can say actually the changes are coming and the changes might be incremental and they're going to come at this stage and this stage and this stage. People can plan for that. Ideally, people where they can, we'd encourage them to save more voluntarily now. So, have a look at what you're saving. Can you afford more? If you're paying in more, will your employer match that? So if you're actually putting 1% and your employer's putting in 1 or 2, actually you're getting 2% more increase, which over a period is going to really kind of compound and increase your outcomes. So people should be looking at that stuff where they can, and we'd really encourage people to try.
Yeah. I just, I worry that, we're saying, oh, now's not a good time in 5 years. Who knows, like what pandemic, war or shit show we'll be in the middle of, and people are like, oh, it's probably just not a good time. It's never going to be a good time, and to change things is never easy, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't try and do stuff straight away. And I feel like these reforms and reports, it's kind of like the child abuse scandals. Like, how many reforms and reports have we had around these issues where they keep going, we'll do an inquiry, and it's like, no, just do something about it. Like, instead of saying to people, we're going to think about how to increase your pension contributions, why you say every business has to now have a salary sacrifice scheme. And what that will mean is that the business saves on NI and so will the employee, or the relief at source scheme that Nest operates, where 80% of people in that don't claim back the higher rate tax relief that they should. Get that sorted. That's money that could go into pension. There seems to be some really low-hanging fruit that could be done, not a 5-year report that's going to cost how much.
I wouldn't disagree that we've waited too long. I think some of the challenges, obviously, the political realities are such that the level of change that might be needed, there probably isn't the consensus to get there. And some of the important bit the kind of pension commission the first time round did was kind of build that consensus to say, actually, there's like a recognition of, across all kind of parts of society, whether it's taxpayers, business, unions, employers, others, that change needs. I mean, everybody at the moment says, yes, we recognise it, but also there's some tough choices to be made. I think the consensus piece is really kind of essential because, you know, we're here for decades. If we're going to set something up that's going to change the way that the nature of the system works for the next 3-4 decades, let's do it right rather than kind of rushed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Put the politicians in the DC schemes. Start there. Yeah. See how their political will changes then. I mean, when you sat in a defined benefit scheme, you're not really motivated to go, oh, the DC stuff needs fixing. But maybe if they're in a nest auto-enrollment scheme, they might go, hold on.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to kind of recognise that, you know, those levels of pension outcome, which you get or would have traditionally got from being in DB, are not the same as you're going to get from DC. But we all should, you know, there's a lot of headlines always like DB is kind of gold plated. The average DB pension for, you know, from my experience, people who went into the pension protection fund and also those in local government, is only about £5,000 or £6,000 a year. So we're not talking about kind of vast fortunes for the majority of people. And, you know, in historically also DB was a relatively minority sport. It wasn't like automatic enrollment that everybody had DB. A lot of people had no pension at all. And you had DB if you were, you know, in the public sector, but also if you were a big employer or an employer who was really kind of caring and thought about you. And there's a lot of those, but it wasn't everybody by far. And so it needs to kind of reflect that actually, you know, the difference that people might perceive between the haves and have-nots is not quite as it might be in reality.
That's true, but it seems like Damo said, there's a lot of low-hanging fruits, and it's something that affects everyone. I'm in my late 30s, so I'm worried about self-employed. I'm worried about my pension. I'm worried about the future. So it's like Damo said, 5 years from now, we're not going to be in a better position. So why don't we just start tackling it now?
Yeah, I think it is important to do the small bits now when we can, kind of like it's the kind of broken windows type syndrome, right? Fix the things where they occur. Some of the kind of big system changes and some of the kind of wider changes, they take longer. And it's also kind of, you know, worth thinking about the order in which some things get done will have a better impact if it's thought through rather than sort of rushed. You know, and some of the benefits that the government introduced alongside the kind of pension scheme bill was a bit of a plan for actually how some of the changes might come through over the next 5 years. So some of that helps, but I think, you know, where we can, we should always make changes as quickly as possible that might improve saver outcomes.
How long did auto-enrollment take to come up with?
It was introduced in 2012, was it? Was that when it went live? Because the communication at the time from DWP was that a state pension plus an 8% auto-enrollment will get people to about 50% of their retirement income needs. Was the plan to ratchet that up over? Was that intention there?
So I think there was a recognition that it would have to increase. So there was a combination of things. I think a recognition that it would have to increase, and also a hope that people would save more potentially where they could. And I guess it's probably worth thinking about the kind of economic environment in which it was conceived as being very different to the one that we've all lived through for the last, you know, 15 plus years. You know, there was a kind of, as it was conceived, there was a kind of growing economy, wages were increasing readily. You know, there were other things going on.
It's funny to think that people who weren't paying into pensions would suddenly go, let's pay more into pensions. It seems naive in a way.
Yeah,
you know, we had to force them to do it because they weren't doing it, but we hoped that they'll just pay more in.
Yeah, and I guess there was a recognition as well that if you looked at the Australian model, which is the model that often we look at for DC in the UK, is that they had a period where it was kind of lower and then they kind of ratcheted it up by kind of 0.5% every couple of years. So you eventually got to the 12%. And people have been calling for the 12%, you know, in the industry and across kind of broader public space for, you know, more than a decade. The reason why it hasn't happened is because the economy has been in the doldrums, frankly, and people have been putting off kind of increasing costs to employers by and large.
It's seen almost, I think, so if we look at the super scheme and when it was introduced, I can't remember the name of the politician, Paul, the Labour guy. Anyway, his messaging was really clear that this is yours. Yeah. It's not our money, it's your money. They did this great job of promoting ownership around this scheme. And I think the average Australian will see that pot of money as theirs. I think the average Brit sees it as like a tax that comes out of their pay slip and doesn't have that sense of ownership over their pot. They have multiple pots spread from previous employers. They just get told what scheme they're going into. They don't know what it's invested in. They should have a similar relationship with that pot as they should with their mortgage. You know, ask a Brit how much they pay on their mortgage. They'll tell you everything about that product.
Yep.
What are you guys doing, or is the industry doing to promote that sense of ownership?
Yeah, so we run a campaign called the Pay Your Pension Some Attention campaign.
That's a great name. Better than ISA, baby.
Yeah.
I like that. Pay pension some attention.
And
if you need a new place for it,
Yeah, mate, I'll wrap the whole thing for you. I'll spit some
did you,
money.
did you have Gemma Collins?
We had Gemma Collins last year.
Yeah.
We've had Timmy Mallet the year before that, and Big Zoo the first year.
And then we got Big T this year. Let's go.
Big reveal in September who the new ambassador
really?
is. But
You decided.
we decided we kind of got pretty much everything ready to go. Boom, push the button, then it'll go live. But that's a big thing that we've been trying to do to try and get people to kind of think about their pensions, kind of get that ownership. Real simple things like, you know, work out where your pension is, log on, make sure your details are right, make sure maybe your partner's details are right, check how much you've got, and then have a think, you know, look at the retirement living standards, think, okay, I see how much I've got. What does that mean that I might need to think about for my future? Are there other choices that I could be making? Could I be contributing more? Could I be asking my employer whether they could do a bit more?
People do want to know, but I think accessing the information that's engaging, because no matter how bad you want to know it, if it's boring, you go dead behind the eyes, don't you? A bit.
No, I agree. You need to. I think one of the big things that, you know, we found really helpful, and hopefully the rest of the industry has found helpful from the campaign, is speak to people at their level, like normally, less jargon, you know, more concise, helpful information. Make it engaging. Don't fill it with, you know, like endless disclaimers. Just try and speak to people.
Yeah, the disclaimer point is a great one, and I'm glad you're on board with that. And hopefully even Rachel Reeves sees the damage that constant disclaimers do.
What age people do you generally target in your marketing? Because, I mean, I wish I learned all this pension stuff when I was like 18 or 20, because the earlier you get in, the bigger your pot's going to be, the less you have to contribute. But if you're starting in your 30s like me, you're slapping like 50% of your salary every month. So what kind of age groups are you focusing your marketing on?
So as part of the campaign, we're largely targeting people between kind of 25 and 55. So it's quite a big group, right? Big group.
That's 90% of our audience.
Yeah.
So a couple million people a month.
Yeah.
Just saying, we are available. We can show you some scary big numbers on retention and audience.
Yeah, no, it'd be good to talk about it more actually, and what we can do maybe. When
You're
we
looking
get
for some ambassadors. Couple handsome chaps.
You got some YouTube videos with you rapping on it that we can judge?
I'll get them on Damo's channel by the end of the day. Don't worry
you don't
about
want to see them. T 2007. That was T Money, T Finesse.
Yeah, mate, the afro wouldn't have fit in the frame.
Pre-rebrand.
Pre-rebrand. Yeah, pre-rebrand.
Yeah, so we try to reach everybody. I think one of the other things that we're really keen on is that people think about how to engage people at life moments. So, you know, when you first start work, you know, maybe when you get that promotion, when you get married, or begin to think about having a family or buying a house, and then when you get to your kind of mid-career kind of check-in, and then kind of at that, as you kind of get towards retirement, to think about. We know a lot of people historically have kind of, you know, forgotten about it until the end, and then, you know, we want people to engage much more right through their life.
If you could catch them at 21 in an engaging way as they enter their job, because I think at that moment, I say 21, but you know, that period of 18 to 21 first job, you're so eager and keen to just learn and get on. And if someone
become an adult,
someone sat down in a constructive way and said, this is the pension, this is what it's for, this is what a risk profile is, so consider which box you tick, because being cautious sounds sensible, but maybe it's not. You know, it feels like that information isn't there at that crucial time.
Yeah, like, and this is what compounding will do to your pension. And you're like, oh, it might get you a bit more excited, instead of every month like, oh, what's this national insurance? They're taking money from me. And then student loan, they're taking money from. Why is everyone robbing my paycheck?
I can't afford that. I'll opt out because manana.
Yeah. But, I mean, it's a bit of a stereotype. But you used to hear those kind of stories about, you know, somebody would join a firm, the union rep would grab them aside and say, whatever you do, stay in a pension, that's going to sort you out. And, you know, the young kid would just stay in and they'd forget about it, and they'd come out the other end with their kind of DB pension and have a good income and something. We need, you know, it's a bit of a, you know, the way the world has worked has changed, but we need the same kind of ethos.
Yeah, that, you know, some sort of content that was there for them at the point of job entry, where it's like, you have to watch this. You have to watch this video, and it will show you how to work your particular pension and how to potentially look at picking your own fund and those kind of things. I think if not everyone's going to watch it. Sometimes people feel like they're being lectured at work, don't they?
Yeah.
And I know from personal experience, we've been into companies and we've done talks. I know when Royal London go in, people are just like, oh, and they're normally financial advisors, they're in a suit. It's not very relatable. But that's a change that I think we could do that now, just to get the participation rates up.
Those little books they had, like Investing for Dummies, or like Pensions, the little yellow book. You just need a video like that, like Pension for Dummies, and then watch it when you're 18 or when you start your first job, and it will just explain the whole thing to you in a nice, easy, calm way. Something like that would be a game changer.
Yeah.
I think.
Get some
handsome guy with good hair to like just explain pensions in a really casual way.
Yeah, that KSI.
He's got a giant forehead, mate.
Yeah.
He does have good hair.
He does have a giant forehead. Big brain, mate.
Big bank balance.
Yeah. He's doing well. I mean, I'm not sure what he's saying about pensions.
Yeah. Not sure either.
He's saying buy Prime.
Maybe if that's your guy in September now, it's going to be a bit awkward, isn't it?
Very awkward. He's like, I'm going to make a phone call, edit this bit out.
I think I need to ask then. So, if you're funded by the pensions themselves, does that mean you're essentially funded by the people who are in the pension? Like, anyone in an auto enrollment is paying a fee, and some of those fees are going to you to run these activities, like lobbying and campaigns and things.
Yeah, I guess ultimately, if you kind of follow the thread through, some of it is from that. A lot of it is also from the events that we put on for the industry.
What's that? What happens in those rooms? What's going on?
So we have a couple of really big conferences a year. Kind of biggest conferences in the kind of sector. That gets from 1,000 to 2,000 people into a room. We have kind of conference areas where people can kind of talk about their combinations of their product, but then we have kind of big debates on stage, which are kind of, what's the future of pensions, how pensions investing, what's the net zero challenge, how do we improve comms, getting everybody together to kind of understand and challenge each other, think about the big questions.
Do people pay to go to that event?
So they're free for some members. They're free for the trustees and the likes, and so the contribution largely comes from those kind of more commercial providers.
Yeah, so the people, the trustees, they get to go, but are people paying for access to them, or
no.
Who's paying to be in the room?
Yeah, so you would have so there's a mixture of things. So the kind of we have a conference hall which has got providers who might pay to be in the hall, and some of them will have content which they'll sponsor to kind of showcase.
Are they? So when I used to work in the property sector, we used to hire the Excel. Is it the Excel Centre?
Yeah.
Yeah, you have the property show. It's called PISS.
Really?
The Property Investor Show, PISS. Yeah, it's an unfortunate name.
Great brand. They need a rebrand.
Yeah. And it would be, stands, and people would pay lots of money to be on a stand, and then people would walk around, and, it was free for the public to come, and everyone was basically trying to sell something. So I'm just interested in, why is someone paying to go into that room?
So I guess some of it is brand awareness. Some of it is people might want to showcase particular things that they offer. So it might be kind of IT
is it like
system.
BlackRock or Vanguard?
So it could be, So it could be BlackRock, Vanguard. Other people in that space. It could be legal firms who kind of offer advice. Lots of different people.
I guess because if you're a pension fund provider and you're using Vanguard funds, and then Mr. BlackRock gets you to switch to them, that's a very big client that moves over. So these kind of schmoozing opportunities, or I'm not trying to paint it out as nefarious.
No. So it's largely showcasing. People can talk and network. That's part of it. Combinations of people sharing experiences, or talking to new providers, to kind of all in one space. It's essentially a festival for pensions. That's one way of putting
it.
Honestly, that's making pensions sexy.
I'm into it. When's your next one?
Pension
So
Fest.
our next one is in October. We're in Manchester. I
think we're pretty big in Manchester.
Come guys.
Well, I live up north, and I lived in Manchester for 10, 12 years. So if you can get us an invite, that'd be great. will come along.
See what I can do.
Yeah, we can make some content around it or something potentially as well. So we're running out of time, and I'm sorry I give you a bit of a grilling on certain points.
Right.
I do think the retirement living standards are great because, as someone put it once, you are the guys that are putting the flag in the ground. You're trying. They get criticism. I see people in the comments go, it's not enough. It's way too much.
Yeah.
There's no way to make people happy. But at least you're trying and you're getting that conversation going. And I think it's going to be interesting for people to realise that you're a group that tries to get policy changes and all the other bits that you are. You're not just these standards. I want to finish with that policy thing, and just ask, is there anything that you think is urgent or realistic that we should be focusing on as a nation with pensions right now, not in 5 years?
So I think the big thing is getting people to think about that kind of adequacy question. We know the commission is going to take a while to work its way through and for its recommendations to start. But I think, you guys have done a good job of challenging me. Can we do things quicker? I think making people think about what they can do now and getting that kind of awareness, even if it's just going and seeing what pension you've got and then thinking about, what contributions am I making? What's my employer doing? And what choices can I make? And also just, I think, getting people to be careful too about some of the choices that they make. There's a lot of noise around kind of how to consolidate your pension and other things. That might not always be the best idea for you. So always making sure you're making informed choices.
I would say that it's great that he's talking about getting self-employed people to invest more, to save more, getting general people to save more. And some of the changes that are happening in pensions kind of gave me a little bit of positivity, optimism.
Yeah, I was also, it's kind of bang your head against the table to hear people say, oh, we're going to do a review and it's going to be 5 years before we make any changes. I think people can make changes to their pensions today. And I think a really crucial one is just logging on and figuring out what fund you're in and asking yourself the question, is this right for me? Below, we have a completely free pension cheat sheet that you can click on and have a look. And we just outline what some of the funds do for each of the major auto-enrollment providers. So we look at the default fund and then some of the other fund options. It's not advice, it's just, teach a man to fish and hopefully give you a bit of an understanding of what you're buying.